The world was spinning. Her head pounded like a war drum, and an unbearable weight pressed down on her chest. She gasped for air, her fingers clutching at silky sheets that were far too luxurious to be hers. Her eyes fluttered open. A massive chandelier glowed above her, casting golden light over an ornate bedroom. No, a palace chamber. Velvet curtains, gold embroidery, towering bookshelves filled with rare tomes. This wasn't her tiny apartment. This wasn't her life. Panic clawed at her throat. She sat up, and the mirror across the room reflected a stranger. Or rather, not a stranger. No, she had seen this face before. The sharp, haughty features, the flowing obsidian hair, the crimson eyes that shimmered with arrogance, cruelty, and a fate doomed beyond repair. This was her. Or rather, this was Lady Evelyn de Vere, the infamous villainess of the Empire. The woman whose crimes were so detestable that the entire nation rejoiced when she was cast out. The noble daughter who schemed, tormented, and manipulated in a desperate attempt to win the love of her betrothed, the crown prince. And in the end, she lost everything. Her father, humiliated, severed all ties. The prince, disgusted, banished her. The nobility turned her name into a curse, and the commoners cheered as her carriage disappeared beyond the capital's walls. She had no wealth, no allies, no future. She was a villainess who had already met her downfall. And now she was her. A shiver ran down her spine. She clenched the silk blanket, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. This wasn't some dream or bizarre hallucination. This was real. She had awakened as the most hated woman in the empire. The door burst open. A maid rushed in, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked as though she had just seen a ghost. "My lady, you should not be awake yet." The woman hesitated before lowering her voice. "Your father has already left the estate. He made it clear that you are no longer his daughter." There was no pity in her tone, only cold, detached formality. The weight of those words settled deep in her bones. Her father had abandoned her. Her fiancé had cast her aside. The empire loathed her. Her past life was gone, erased like ink in the rain. Her future was a gaping abyss, waiting to consume her whole. And yet, as she sat there, her heart still pounding in her chest, a thought struck her with terrifying clarity. She was free. No more noble duties. No more endless political schemes. No more chasing after a man who would never love her. Yes, she had no wealth, no allies, no power. But she had something far more valuable. A second chance. And she would not waste it. Not as a villainess, not as a noblewoman, but as something no one would ever expect. A humble shopkeeper. And so, the infamous Lady Evelyn de Vere would disappear from history to sell ink and paper. At least that was the plan. But fate had other ideas. The air smelled different here. Gone was the overwhelming scent of noble perfumes and candle wax that clung to the grand estates of the capital. Instead, the crisp, earthy aroma of parchment filled the small wooden shop, mixed with the sweetness of sugar-dusted candies displayed near the counter. She leaned against the doorway, staring out at the lively street before her. Children ran past, their laughter filling the air as school bells chimed in the distance. Merchants called out their daily deals, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from a nearby bakery. This was her new life. She wasn't Lady Evelyn de Vere anymore. She wasn't the scheming villainess of a doomed love story. She was just a simple shopkeeper. The shop was modest but cozy. Wooden shelves lined with fine paper, ink bottles in neat rows, stacks of blank journals, and a small section filled with candies and snacks. Stationery was an unusual business, but a necessary one. Students needed supplies, scholars needed parchment. And besides, who would ever suspect a fallen villainess to be running a stationery shop? She sighed, rolling up the sleeves of her plain dress. No more silk gowns, no more jewelry, just simple, practical clothes. No one knew her here. No one feared her. No one expected anything from her. And she liked it that way. Or at least, she thought she did. The bell above the door jingled. A child peeked inside, wide-eyed and hesitant. A little girl, no older than 8, clutched a few coins in her small hands. Evelyn smiled, kneeling slightly. "Hello there, looking for something?" The girl hesitated before pointing at a red-covered notebook. I I want to buy this for my big brother's birthday. Evelyn nodded and carefully wrapped the notebook in brown paper. That's very thoughtful of you. The girl's eyes sparkled. He says he'll write the greatest book in the empire one day. Evelyn chuckled. Then he'll need a good notebook for that. The girl giggled, handing over the coins before clutching the package to her chest. Thank you, miss. He'll be so happy. She turned to leave, but just as she reached the door, she paused. You know? The girl whispered, tilting her head curiously. You look kind of like the bad lady from the Capitol, the one who was kicked out. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Had someone recognized her? Before she could react, the girl continued, But you can't be her. That lady was scary. You're nice. And with that, she ran off. Evelyn stood frozen. Her fingers clenched the edge of the wooden counter. Even here, in this small town, whispers of her past life lingered. She thought she had left it behind, that she could start over. But something told her, escaping her past wouldn't be so easy. And she had no idea just how right she was. Evelyn had expected customers, students looking for notebooks, scholars in need of fine parchment, maybe even the occasional housewife picking up writing materials for letters. What she hadn't expected was them. Miss, I want the sparkliest ink you have. Evelyn blinked down at the young girl in front of her. She had big, bright eyes and an air of authority far too mature for her age. And why do you need sparkly ink? Evelyn asked, amused. The girl puffed out her chest. Because my future fiancé must be impressed with my letters. He's going to be modest and handsome, unlike my annoying brother. Evelyn chuckled as she handed the girl a bottle of shimmering silver ink. Sounds like you have high standards. Of course, I refuse to settle for anything less. With a satisfied nod, the little girl paid and skipped away. Evelyn shook her head in amusement. Children were always entertaining customers, but just as she reached for a notebook to restock the shelf, another voice caught her attention. My brother's crown is so heavy, I don't know why he bothers wearing it all the time. Evelyn nearly dropped the notebook. Her head snapped toward the speaker. A small boy, casually examining the candy display as he chatted with his friend. Did he just say, crown? As in, the royal family's crown? Evelyn's pulse quickened. No, it couldn't be. He was just some child bragging nonsense, right? But then the boy continued. And the Tower Master is such a weirdo. He keeps sending my brother all these letters, but he never smiles when he visits. Evelyn's heart stopped. The Tower Master, the most powerful mage in the Empire. A mysterious and untouchable figure who rarely appeared in public. And this kid was talking about him like some distant uncle. Evelyn's fingers twitched. Who were these children? Her shop wasn't in a noble district. She had purposely chosen a small town, far from the capital, to avoid exactly this kind of situation. But before she could dwell on it further, the bell chimed again. A boy with dark hair stepped inside. His uniform was neat, his expression calm. He browsed the ink bottles for a moment before glancing at Evelyn. Miss, he said, do you have any rare paper? The kind that doesn't smudge with magic? Evelyn hesitated. Magical paper? She repeated. Yes, it's for my older brother. He prefers high-quality materials for spellcrafting. Her stomach sank. Spellcrafting. High-quality magical paper. An older brother who needed it. There was only one person in the Empire known for his obsession with magical research. The Tower Master. Evelyn forced a smile as she handed the boy the best parchment she had. That should work. Thank you, the boy said politely. Then, with a small smile, he added, Oh, my brother's been looking for you, by the way. Evelyn nearly choked. What? The boy tilted his head. He showed me an old portrait of you once. I think he's been trying to find out where you went. Evelyn barely managed to keep her face neutral. She had chosen a peaceful life, a quiet shop, a simple existence. But if the Tower Master was looking for her, her past wasn't as forgotten as she had hoped. And worse, it was coming straight for her. The bell above the shop door jingled again. Evelyn barely had time to process the strange children's words before yet another customer entered. But this time, it wasn't a child. It was a man. Tall, composed, dangerous. His long coat was embroidered with delicate silver threads, and his boots barely made a sound as he stepped inside. His sharp gaze swept over the shop, taking in every detail with an eerie sense of calculation. A noble, no, not just any noble. Evelyn recognized the insignia on his cloak immediately. A warrior mage from the royal guard. Her breath hitched. Why was someone like him in her store? The man didn't speak right away. Instead, he strolled over to the counter, casually inspecting the ink bottles and parchment rolls before finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. "You have quite the selection," he remarked, his voice smooth but laced with something unreadable. Evelyn forced a polite smile. "Thank you. I try to keep my customers happy." His expression didn't change. "Do you run this shop alone?" A simple question, but something about the way he asked it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Yes," she replied carefully. The man hummed in response, picking up an ink bottle and rolling it between his fingers. "Strange. It's not often you see a shop like this run by a single woman, especially not one with—" He trailed off, his gaze sharpening. "You're kind of past." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She kept her face neutral, calm, unbothered. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said smoothly. The warrior mage smiled. "It wasn't friendly." "I think you do." Evelyn's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress beneath the counter. Was this it? Had she been found out? Was the Empire sending people to drag her back? But before she could respond, the shop bell rang again. And this time, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The warrior mage straightened immediately, his easy demeanor vanishing in an instant. Evelyn turned her head just in time to see him. A man in dark robes stepped inside, his presence commanding yet impossibly quiet. His movements were graceful, his aura radiating an unsettling stillness. His hood was pulled down just enough to reveal silver-rimmed glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. Evelyn's stomach twisted. There was only one man in the Empire who dressed like that. Only one man who carried himself with that level of quiet authority. The Tower Master. He lifted his gaze, and for the briefest second, Evelyn swore she saw recognition flash in his eyes. The warrior mage shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Tower Master," he greeted stiffly. The man barely acknowledged him. Instead, he turned his full attention to her. "You've been difficult to find," he murmured. Evelyn's hands trembled beneath the counter. She had tried to disappear. She had tried to leave everything behind. But now, standing face to face with one of the most powerful men in the Empire, she realized the truth. Her past wasn't just knocking at her door. It had walked straight inside. Silence stretched between them. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears as the Tower Master stood before her, his unreadable gaze locked onto hers. She could feel the warrior mage shifting beside her, tense and alert. Two of the most powerful men in the Empire. In her tiny stationery shop. This was not how she had imagined her peaceful, quiet life. The Tower Master took a slow step forward, his fingers trailing along the edge of a parchment stack. "You disappeared," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undeniable weight. "Without a trace. That is, impressive." Evelyn kept her expression calm, though her mind was racing. Disappeared? That meant he had actually been looking for her. Why? Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. A new customer had arrived, and the moment Evelyn laid eyes on him, she felt her blood freeze. Golden hair, piercing ice blue eyes. An aura of authority so suffocating it made the very air feel heavier. The Crown Prince, the man who had banished her. Evelyn barely kept her expression neutral. What was he doing here? The warrior mage immediately stiffened, straightening into a formal stance. "Your Highness!" Even the Tower Master turned slightly, acknowledging the prince with a small nod. The prince, however, ignored them both. His icy gaze settled directly on Evelyn. It was a look she remembered all too well. Cold, calculating, unreadable. He stepped forward, his boots making a soft click against the wooden floor. "I had my doubts," he murmured, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "But it really is you." Evelyn felt her fingers clench beneath the counter. She wanted to laugh. Of all the people in the Empire, he was the last person she wanted to see again. She forced herself to meet his gaze, tilting her head with feigned curiosity. "Oh, and who might you be?" The warrior mage looked horrified. The Tower Master raised a single eyebrow. The Crown Prince himself actually blinked. A moment of silence. Then, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was amused, intrigued. A slow chuckle escaped him. "How interesting," he murmured, taking another step closer. "Tell me, Evelyn, have you truly forgotten? Or are you just playing a new game? Evelyn kept her face blank. She didn't know if pretending ignorance would work, but she had no other choice. Because one thing was certain, the Crown Prince did not come here by accident. And that meant her past wasn't just knocking at the door anymore. It was breaking it down. Evelyn's fingers curled beneath the counter, her knuckles white. The Crown Prince's words lingered in the air, wrapping around her like an invisible noose. Tell me, Evelyn, have you truly forgotten? Or are you just playing a new game? She held his gaze, her expression carefully blank. Inside, her mind was racing. If the prince was here, if the Tower Master was here, then something was terribly, terribly wrong. The Crown Prince wasn't a man who made casual visits. And the Tower Master? He never left the tower unless it was for matters of extreme importance. Evelyn exhaled slowly and tilted her head. I'm sorry, but I don't know what you mean. Perhaps you're mistaking me for someone else. The Crown Prince let out a quiet chuckle, amused. The Tower Master, however, wasn't smiling. Instead, he reached into his robe and pulled out a small folded parchment. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the counter. Evelyn hesitated. Her pulse quickened as she carefully unfolded the paper. The moment she saw what was written inside, her breath caught in her throat. It was her name. Not Evelyn DeVire. Not the exiled Villainess. But something far worse. It was a royal decree, signed and sealed with the Emperor's insignia. And at the bottom, it contained one chilling sentence. Evelyn DeVire is not to be harmed until further notice. The words blurred in her vision as cold dread settled deep into her bones. The Tower Master spoke. His voice was quiet, measured. You've become an enigma, Evelyn, he murmured. A woman everyone believed to be dead, only to reappear in the most unexpected place. Evelyn swallowed hard, keeping her face calm, even as her thoughts swirled like a storm. She wasn't being hunted. She wasn't being dragged back to face execution. No, this was something much, much worse. They needed her alive. For what? For who? And why now? She forced herself to look up, meeting the Tower Master's gaze. And what exactly do you want from me? The Crown Prince leaned against the counter, watching her with open amusement. But it was the Tower Master who delivered the final blow. I need you to come with me, he said smoothly. To the capital. Evelyn felt the floor beneath her shift. No, absolutely not. She had barely escaped the capital's suffocating grip. She had fought to carve out this tiny, insignificant life where no one cared about her. And now, they were dragging her right back into the lion's den. She clenched her fists. She had worked too hard to escape. She would not let them pull her back so easily. Evelyn forced a small smile, lifting her chin. I appreciate the offer, she said lightly, but I'm quite happy running my shop. I have no reason to return. The Tower Master simply studied her. And then, he smiled. A knowing, dangerous smile. Then allow me to give you a reason. He placed another parchment on the counter. This time, it wasn't a decree. It was a letter. From her father. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Her father, who had disowned her, who had cast her aside without a second thought. She hesitated. But eventually, with trembling hands, she unfolded the letter. There, scrawled in bold ink, were words that shattered everything she thought she knew. Evelyn, if you are alive, you are in danger. Trust no one. She barely had time to process it before the Tower Master spoke again. You see, he murmured, it seems your past is not as simple as you believed. Evelyn gripped the paper, her mind spinning. Her father was warning her? Why now? And more importantly, who or what was coming for her? The Tower Master tilted his head. Shall we depart? Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She had a choice, to stay and pretend none of this was happening, or to go and uncover the truth about her past. Either way, one thing was clear. Her quiet, peaceful life was officially over. Evelyn hadn't left the shop all evening. The Tower Master and the Crown Prince had eventually departed, leaving her with only one instruction. Decide quickly. But how could she? One moment, she had been just a humble shopkeeper. The next, she was being dragged back into the Empire's twisted games of power. She let out a slow breath, staring at the letter from her father. Evelyn, if you are alive, you are in danger. Trust no one. What did he mean? Who was after her? More importantly, why did he care now? A knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Evelyn stiffened. It was late. Her shop had been closed for hours. Slowly, she rose to her feet, approaching the door with careful steps. Another knock, louder this time. Evelyn hesitated before pressing her back against the wooden frame. "We're closed," she called out. Silence, then a whisper. "We know who you are." Evelyn's breath hitched. She spun around, blowing out the candle on her desk. Darkness swallowed the shop, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight seeping through the windows. Her heart pounded. "Who was outside?" Another whisper, low, raspy. "You cannot run forever." A chill crawled up her spine. The urge to run seized her instincts, but she forced herself to stay still. To think! Her shop had only been discovered by the Tower Master and the Crown Prince today. And yet, someone else already knew. That meant one of two things. Either she had been watched all along, or someone wanted to make sure she never left this town alive. She stepped back carefully, reaching for the small knife she kept behind the counter. Silence. No more knocking. No more whispers. Just the sound of the wind pressing against the wooden walls. Slowly, Evelyn inched toward the window. The street outside was empty, or so it seemed. Then, movement. A shadow slipped between the buildings. Gone in an instant. She shivered. Whoever they were, they didn't try to break in. They didn't attack. They just wanted her to know they were watching. Evelyn tightened her grip on the knife. This was no longer just about her past. This was something bigger, something darker. Her father's warning echoed in her mind. Trust no one. She had thought she could live quietly, that she could disappear. But the moment the Tower Master and the Crown Prince had found her, they had made her a target. And now she had no choice. She had to find out who was after her. And why? Because if she didn't, they would find her first. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Not after the whisper at her door. Not after the shadow that slipped through the streets like a ghost. By morning, she had made her decision. She couldn't ignore this. She couldn't stay here and pretend she was safe. She needed answers. And that meant going back. Not to the capital. Not yet. But there was one place she could start. The old Vire estate. The home she had been cast out from. The home where everything had fallen apart. Evelyn didn't pack much. A change of clothes, a dagger hidden beneath her skirt, and the letter from her father. The only proof she had that something far worse was at play. By the time she reached the outskirts of the estate, the sky had begun to darken. The mansion loomed in the distance, its once grand walls now covered in creeping vines. The windows were dark, the gates locked, abandoned. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the bars. Her father had left this place behind. But why? Carefully, she climbed over the gate, her heart pounding as her feet hit the ground. The air was still. Too still. She moved cautiously toward the entrance, her hand hovering over the dagger at her side. The moment she stepped inside, dust swirled in the dim light. The grand hall was silent, filled with the ghosts of a past she barely remembered. And then she saw it. A table covered in scattered documents, not old ones, recent ones. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she stepped closer, her fingers brushing over the papers. Letters, reports, files with her name on them. She picked one up, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just about her exile. It was evidence. Detailed records of who had truly orchestrated her downfall. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. There, written in ink, signed, sealed. Her exile had been planned, fabricated. Someone had wanted her gone. Someone had twisted the truth and painted her as a villainess, ensuring that she would never return. But why? Her gaze darted over the signatures at the bottom of each report. And then she found it. A name that made her blood turn to ice. Her voice was barely a whisper. The Crown Prince? The papers fell from her hands. Everything she had believed, everything, had been a lie. She had thought the prince had exiled her out of disgust, out of hatred. But the truth was far worse. He had done it on purpose. And now he was back in her life. But for what? A cold realization settled over her. She wasn't just a woman running from her past. She was a piece in a game she didn't even know she was playing. And the Crown Prince? He was the one who had set the board. Evelyn's hands trembled as she clutched the letter bearing the Crown Prince's signature. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated move. Her exile had never been about her actions. It had never been about the so-called crimes of Lady Evelyn de Vire. The Crown Prince had wanted her gone. And now, he wanted her back. Her mind raced. What had changed? What was he after? Footsteps. Evelyn's breath hitched. The sound was slow, deliberate. Someone approaching the estate. Had they followed her? She had seconds to decide. Grabbing the documents, she shoved them into her bag and bolted toward the side door. She barely made it through before a voice rang out. Leaving so soon? Evelyn froze. The Crown Prince! He stood in the doorway, his regal posture at odds with the shadows of the ruined estate. His piercing blue eyes gleamed in the dim light, amusement flickering at the edges of his expression. I expected you to come here eventually, he mused, stepping forward. You were always stubborn. Evelyn's grip tightened around the dagger hidden beneath her cloak. She forced a smile. And yet, I was never quite stubborn enough to stop you from ruining my life. The prince chuckled, slow and deliberate. Ruined? That's a strong word, Evelyn. She bristled. He wasn't denying it. She lifted her chin, fire burning in her gaze. I suppose framing me and exiling me from the capital was an act of kindness then. The prince's smirk faltered. For the first time since she'd met him, his expression turned serious. Do you truly think you were the victim? He asked softly. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. You tell me. A heavy silence settled between them. Then, to her surprise, he sighed. You were never supposed to return, he murmured, rubbing his temple as if she were a problem he hadn't accounted for. And yet, here you are, selling stationery of all things. Evelyn took a slow step back. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. She had assumed he would be indifferent, that he would see her as nothing more than a stain from his past. Instead, there was something else in his voice, frustration, and something dangerously close to regret. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the silence. You should have told her the truth sooner, Your Highness. Evelyn turned sharply. The Tower Master? He stood at the entrance, his robe flowing like a dark tide around him. His silver-rimmed glasses glinted in the faint moonlight. Unlike the prince, his expression was unreadable. Your games have gone on long enough, he murmured, stepping forward. Evelyn's heart pounded. What truth? She demanded. The Crown Prince exhaled, running a hand through his golden hair. Finally, he met her gaze. Your exile, he said slowly, was the only way to keep you alive. Evelyn's blood ran cold. What? She took a step back, shaking her head. That doesn't make any sense. You made the entire empire hate me. You destroyed my name. And in doing so, I ensured no one would come after you, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Evelyn's breath hitched. No, this had to be a lie. He had exiled her to protect her. Before she could speak, the Tower Master stepped closer, his gaze sharp. Tell her who ordered it, he said. Evelyn turned to the prince, her pulse pounding. Who? She whispered. The prince's jaw tightened. And then, he said the name that shattered her world. The Emperor. Evelyn staggered back. No, the Emperor, the ruler of the empire, the most powerful man in the kingdom, had ordered her exile? Why? She whispered, barely able to breathe. The Crown Prince hesitated, and that was when she realized he wasn't just protecting her. He was hiding something far worse, and Evelyn was going to find out exactly what it was. Evelyn's world had been shattered before, when she was exiled, when her father abandoned her, when she woke up alone, cast aside like a villain in a tragic story. But this was something else entirely. The Emperor had ordered her exile, and the Crown Prince, her supposed enemy, had been the one to ensure she lived. Evelyn's breathing was shallow. Her pulse pounded like war drums in her ears. She had spent years believing she was the villain of this story, that she had deserved her downfall. But now she wasn't sure if she had ever even been a player in this game. She swallowed hard, her gaze snapping to the Crown Prince. Why? She demanded, her voice sharp, cutting through the thick silence. Why would the Emperor want me dead? The prince's expression darkened. Behind him, the Tower Master adjusted his glasses, watching silently. Waiting. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, the prince finally said. Evelyn clenched her fists. Try me! For a long moment, he studied her. And then, he stepped forward. Lowering his voice, he murmured, Because you're not who you think you are. Evelyn's breath hitched. What? The prince exhaled slowly. Your exile was never about the petty crimes they accused you of. It was never about your engagement to me. It was never even about your father. He hesitated. Then, finally, he said the words that changed everything. The Emperor ordered your execution because you are the last surviving heir of a bloodline he tried to erase. Evelyn's entire body went numb. No, no, that wasn't possible. She stumbled back, shaking her head. That's, that's a lie. The prince's jaw tightened. It isn't. Evelyn's mind reeled. My family was noble, yes, but they weren't the real Vire family. The Tower Master cut in smoothly. They were placed there to keep you hidden. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Hidden. Like a secret. Like a threat. Her pulse roared in her ears. Then who am I? The prince's gaze darkened. You are the last surviving descendant of the fallen house of Aurelius. Evelyn gasped. Aurelius? The name of a once powerful house. A house that had been destroyed by the emperor himself. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. She had read about it in history books. The house of Aurelius had been accused of treason and wiped from existence over a decade ago. Everyone had died, or so the empire had believed. And yet, here she stood, alive, the last remaining heir of a bloodline powerful enough to threaten the emperor himself. The realization settled into her bones, cold and unforgiving. Her exile hadn't been a punishment. It had been an execution in disguise, and now, the people who had orchestrated her downfall were pulling her back into their game. Evelyn's fingers trembled at her sides. She had spent years hiding, running, trying to erase her past. But now she had a choice. She could run again, disappear forever, never looking back. Or she could fight. She could step into the role they had tried so hard to erase. She could reclaim her name, her legacy, her rightful place in this empire. The villainess they had feared was long gone. But something far more dangerous had taken her place. Evelyn lifted her chin, her heart steady. She knew her answer. She turned to the Crown Prince and the Tower Master, a slow, knowing smile creeping onto her lips. Then I suppose it's time to remind the Empire who I really am.